And we are live. And once again, I'd love to welcome everyone to tonight's class. It's called Eat or Be Eaten. And I'm the instructor today. My name is Daryl Radijak, and for some reason there it goes. My name is Daryl Radijak. I'm a wildlife biologist. I specialize in large carnivores. But tonight we're going to be talking about this really cool concept in wildlife. It's predator-prey relations. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to spend about 45 minutes or so going through a presentation talking about it. But this is a relatively small class. We got about 10 people in here, and so I'm truly going to invite y'all to participate, ask questions, chime in when I call for it. But for the most part, I want you to sit back, relax, and enjoy, because that's what we're here for. We're here to teach you to learn to live with wildlife. And hopefully, if you can get through some of these concepts, you'll have a much better understanding of what's going on out there. So with that, let's get started. I do this all the time. It doesn't matter if it's myself or any other instructor. We always want to let everyone know who the instructor is and what their background is, because the one thing we stress at Wildlife for You is that we use high-quality instructors that teach science. This isn't going to be about opinion or what I think, or this is really going to be up-to-date science. And so we want everyone to be comfortable with their instructor. And so to give you a little bit of background about myself, again, my name is Daryl Radijak. I did receive my degree in environmental science and forestry from Syracuse University. If you've never heard of it, it's the State University of New York College of Environmental Science and Forestry. Just think of Syracuse University and you're there. Anyway, I received my degree in 1992, so that tells you what an old man I am. But ever since receiving my degree in the early 90s, I started working with animals. I had my first big break working at a place called the Appalachian Bear Center. And so I was literally taking care of orphan cubs that the National Park Service or the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency would bring to me to be released back in the wild. So had a wonderful time there, but then I graduated up and took a position with the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency. And then I started working with a whole bunch of different animals. I was working with deer, bear, elk, you name it, I was working with it. After a while, the director saw something in me. He promoted me again and made me chief of wildlife for the state of Tennessee, which was fantastic. And I did that for about 5 years. But the problem is, if you, as a little boy, always dreamed of living and working in the Rockies, you can't get there through Tennessee. And so about 3 years ago, made the jump. We moved to northern New Mexico, just the southern part of the Rockies, and it's absolutely incredible because now I deal with all sorts of animals which, as a little boy, I always dreamed of working with. So with that, now you know who I am. Most people know that. Sorry I do that all the time, but it's for all the new folks that register and sign up for that. So let's get started. Here's the thing. We're going to be talking about predator-prey relations, or this concept of one animal eating another animal. And the first thing I got to do, folks, I got to get you in the right frame of mind, because when we're talking about some of these concepts, there's some things you deal with in Mother Nature that sometimes are not pleasant and people don't want to hear about them. And the thing is that this is all natural stuff. So what I want everyone to do is be in the right frame of mind. And I'm going to teach you a little strategy, because this is kind of what I do. Nobody likes to see any animal get hurt or killed or anything like that. I don't either. I'm a wildlife biologist. This is what I deal with, though. And so there's a certain way you could think about it, which makes it a whole lot more palatable. And so a good way to start thinking about when we're talking about wildlife and some of these concepts that just seem kind of gruesome or you don't want to hear about it, think of a rose bush. If there's any gardeners out there, whether or not you're doing a fruit trees or any other type of plants, but we'll use a rose bush for this example. But if you think of a rose bush and how it grows, and if you know anything about gardening, you have to prune some of the branches. And so you select some of those weaker branches that aren't going in the right direction. They're kind of scrawny. What they're doing is they're robbing the rest of the plant of much needed nutrients that's coming from the soils. And so a gardener goes in and prunes some of those weaker individual branches, or those stray branches that are going off in different directions. And by pruning those weaker ones, what do you end up with? You end up with an amazing rose bush that is just vibrant and full of life. And so this is, try to get your mind around this. When we're dealing with wildlife populations, you could always think of it in this terminology. It makes it a little bit softer when you're dealing with some of these harder concepts or harder issues to deal with. And so it doesn't matter if we're dealing with bison or bears or bighorns or birds or bugs. And I worked hard to get that alliteration there. But all those animals, when I talk about bears, I'm not talking about a bear. When I'm talking about a crane, I'm not talking about a single crane. I'm talking about the entire species. We're not talking about individual animals. So bighorn, we're talking about all bighorn. Bison, all bison. And so let's think of these animals as the entire suite of animals within that species. And so let's try not to focus on the individuals, because then it becomes harder to deal with when something doesn't go right with that particular animal. And so whenever a wildlife biologist is talking about the animal they work with, it's usually they're talking about the populations. And so we're going to spend about the rest of the time talking about wildlife populations in this predator-prey relationships. So if you look at nature, or you just look at an ecosystem in general, you know that it is made up of a multitude of species. And I just have just a fraction of what you find within an ecosystem. Now you go from one ecosystem to another system, you're going to get a whole different suite of species here. But for the most part, with each and every one of these ecosystems, whether or not it's this eastern ecosystem where some of you may be living in the say Tennessee, Georgia, you have those oak hickory forests over there. Some of the western folks that are on this presentation, we're dealing more with these pine forests. We could be talking about a maritime or an ocean ecosystem. And so depending on what ecosystem we're dealing with, we have a whole different suite of species within that ecosystem. And so once again, instead of thinking about individual animals, let's think about the individual species within that ecosystem. And what I want to do to kind of kick off our line of thinking with this whole predator-prey relation, let's focus on one particular animal. And this is just going to be an example to get us started. And so we'll look at the rabbit. And so here we have a rabbit. We all know what rabbits do. Everyone knows how prolific they are and that they can reproduce. So well, you can't really start with one rabbit. You got to start with at least two rabbits. But if you start with two rabbits, a male and a female, you all know that before too long, you're going to have a huge population of rabbits, because rabbits do what rabbits do. Here's the thing. When we're dealing with a species or a population of some kind of species, very, very rarely does that species just live and then just control their population by dying of old age. And so you really don't have many animals out there that are just growing up, spending their whole life eating, reproducing, and then dying of old age. It rarely ever happens like that, especially in Mother Nature. She's got other ways of controlling wildlife populations. So if we look at what are some of the driving factors that really limit wildlife populations, there's a number of things that rise to the top as being really big drivers that really control how many animals are on the landscape. And so let's start with a couple of these. We all know that there are certain diseases out there that can go around and really devastate a population and really literally keep that population in control. I'll give you an example. One thing that we're dealing with quite a bit lately within the deer world is this new disease that's on the horizon called chronic wasting disease, which really, it takes a while to manifest, but the deer that are coming down with that just aren't living their maximum lifespan. And so disease definitely has the ability to limit a population as far as numbers go. Another way that populations can be limited is through environmental situations. In fact, just today I was listening to something on the radio. I listen to corny stuff, wildlife news, but believe it or not. And they had talked about a weather event. It was a hailstorm that really wreaked some damage up in Montana that ended up taking out, I think it was over 11,000 birds in this one lake. And so there are certain things that Mother Nature throws at us that can really wreak havoc and drastically reduce a population. It could be a wildfire, it could be a very severe winter, it could be that hailstorm. There's drought is another driving one. And so there's environmental conditions that will keep wildlife populations in check. Another one is resource availability. Obviously, animals need food to survive. When the food is limited, they can't reproduce, they can't keep on surviving. So the amount of food available to them is a key factor. But the one that we're going to focus on tonight is this last one, because it's a really key one. It's really, really interesting. I think we can have some really good discussions about it. This whole idea of predator-prey relations. And y'all know what that is. It's literally when one animal eats another animal. And there's a dynamic there that's pretty interesting, could be pretty intense at times. But I want to spend the rest of the evening talking about these predator-prey relations and how they can limit and really affect how a species evolves. And so let's dive in here head first. And oh no, here I am. I'm a biologist, I'm a scientist. Every once in a while I'm going to throw a graph at you because I have to make sure people realize I am a scientist, because sometimes my presentations get a little corny. But I'm going to throw a graph in here which is going to explain this predator-prey dynamic. And so let's start here with the two axes. We have time on the right, so time marches on, obviously. The size on the left, what we're going to be talking about is the size of the population. And we've got two different populations we're looking at here. We have prey populations, which are usually the animals that are eaten. We have predator populations, which obviously eat the prey populations. And so one line is going to be red. The prey populations will be red. The predator population will be in blue. And so let's look at this first start of the graph. And so remember, prey population. We could think of rabbits right now. Let's think of rabbits and coyotes. So if coyotes were solely feeding on rabbits, what you'd see here, the population of rabbits is in red. We know we've got lots of rabbits. Prey species are usually more abundant than predator species. And so what you see here, and unfortunately I'm trying to see if you can't see my cursor, but if you start at the left-hand side, you see the prey population begins to increase, and it's going up in numbers. And at the very, very beginning, the predator populations are relatively low. But as those prey populations increase in size, that means there's more food available for the predator populations. And so the predator populations will begin to increase because there's such an abundance of this food resource. And so as those predator populations increase, you're starting to max out, and they become very, very efficient. And guess what happens when you get lots and lots of predators on the landscape? They begin to impact the prey populations. And then you see that prey population begin to decline all the way. And when all those prey items disappear, then the predator populations have to follow. I know this sounds confusing, but what you're going to see is a cycle that goes up and down, up and down. And so that's the mathematics. That's kind of the boring, dull biology speak that a lot of people will try. A lot of state agencies, federal agencies will throw you some of this dry stuff. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to explain this graph in a much easier way to understand, hopefully. So let's start. Let's take some kind of antelope or gazelle, and we're going to talk about this. So that obviously is going to be the prey animal. So you have this gazelle. It's out on the savannah. Say we're in Africa, out on the savannah. There's plenty of grasses, plenty of food available for that antelope. And that antelope starts reproducing. There's so much food out there that it's doing well. It starts reproducing, growing in numbers. Everything's going great. You have a predator move in, whether or not it's some kind of leopard or other large cat that will feed on that antelope, but you only have one of them. There's not many. There's not many of these predators on the landscape. So the antelope keep reproducing, and their numbers are growing and growing. Now that you have this tremendous food source for that predator on the landscape, guess what? Predator populations start growing. And if you see here, very much like that graph I just showed you, you have way more of the prey population than you do of the predator population. And so now predators are really efficient. They will eat many of the prey items throughout the year. It depends on what one specifically we're dealing with. But what they'll do is they'll begin to impact that prey population. And so what you'll see over time, you start to see the number of antelope start to decline. And guess what happens? When you lose that food source, pretty soon, and this is that time delay, then those predators are going to start to disappear as well. And so you're down to having not many predators, and so when there's not many predators, the cycle begins again. And so this hopefully was a better way of explaining how you have those cyclical predator-prey relations with the populations. So a prey population goes up, that drives the predator population to go up. But once that predator population goes up, it drives the prey population down. And there's just that lag time, and it just keeps oscillating back and forth. So does everyone understand how that works? Hopefully you remember that from your high school biology or wherever you took biology, but it's a pretty simple graph. Hopefully that little graphic I created will help explain it better. So anyone have any questions? Good deal. All right, so one of the things that I found was really, really cool. And again, whenever I put these presentations together, I end up learning something that I never learned before. And it's great research. And I will tell you without a doubt, doesn't matter what animal you're interested in, where your specialty is, never stop learning. And so there's so many good sources of information, but I will tell you that you have to be careful. Most people will pick this up and turn to Google and start Googling stuff. Just make sure the information, the source of your information is reputable. And so make sure you're getting it from either academic institutions or state or federal government. They're producing documents that are based on science. Sometimes it's not so good to follow an individual, even though I'm an individual here, but make sure you have a reputable source providing you with that information. So one of the things that I thought was really, really interesting, when I was researching this to see, all right, about when did these predator-prey relations, obviously, it happened, it was happening during the time of the dinosaurs. But what I found was really interesting. They have documented in the fossil record these animals here, believe it or not, these creatures here, these heterolids, 400 million years. And so this way, way, way predates dinosaurs. Dinosaurs, most of you know, go back 60 million years. So these fossils, these heterolids, are 400 million years old. What was so interesting that I found was, if you look at them, they were this tubular type of creature that lived in the ocean. And what they found in the fossil record was there were these holes that were drilled into the side of them. And literally what they figured out was all those holes, not all of them would have holes, but literally what it was there was another creature. They haven't identified what other creature it was, but this other creature was preying on these heterolids. And so way back, way before the dinosaurs, when we were just having some of this initial life forms, microscopic level life forms, we started developing this predator-prey relationship where one animal would feed on another animal. And so that's pretty interesting that things literally have evolved with this dynamic. And so the thing you have to understand, since it's been going on for so long, these relationships, these predator-prey relationships, literally have been driving evolution. And it's really interesting. In fact, I spent most of today kind of daydreaming about some of the different things we could talk about. In fact, I'm going to have you guys provide input here soon. But just thinking about literally any animal on the landscape, you can trace it back to how this predator-prey relation kind of has shaped this animal. And so let's look at this guy right off the bat. So everyone knows that's a tiger there. And the way it looks is it's such a beautiful animal, and you have to understand it looks like it looks literally because of this predator-prey relationship. And so y'all know that obviously this is a predator animal on the landscape, and it has to feed on other herbivores, whether or not it's deer or antelope or whatever animals are in the environment for this animal to feed on, and to give it an evolutionary adaptation which allows it to feed on the deer, guess what it evolved? Those stripes. Look how well that tiger now blends into its natural surroundings. And so as a predator that needs to get close to one of these larger animals, that dynamic of this predator, one animal feeding on the other animal, it allows each animal to evolve adaptations which help it survive. And a lot of it is based on this eat or be eaten. And so the tiger is a great example, but we can literally go on and on. And so I'm going to blow your brains with this one. Zebras. Sorry for sticking in Africa, but I think these are some of the greatest and easiest examples. Does anyone know why a zebra looks like it does? What's that striping? What are the advantages of that striping? And I will tell you, this is one of the other pieces of information I learned while researching this. Trish, that's one theory about blending in the grass. Actually, I could expand on that. And that idea of that striping helps them blend in the grass has kind of been disputed or refuted, I should say. Because here's the thing, it actually does allow them to do that. When you get a zebra or multiple zebra in the grass from a long distance, they kind of blend in. It creates this mass that you can't really detect an individual animal in there. And so that striping does allow them to do this, but the reason they're not sure that was the reasoning was because many of the animals that will prey on the zebras usually aren't stalking them from a long distance. They have relatively poor eyesight. They're using their nose more than anything. So they're using their nose, their hearing, their eyesight, especially if they're hunting at night. They're not going to be seeing these zebras from a long distance in the grass. And so they kind of refuted that. So does anyone else have another guess as to the striping on the zebra? There's one really popular one. All right, I saw Daniela typing, but if I think she stopped typing. All right, there's two leading theories, and one of them is relatively new. One has been accepted for a long time. Y'all know that lions and some of these other large carnivores or large predators on the savanna will prey on these zebras. And what they have found, especially when the zebras are huddled up in a picture like this, when you have multiple animals all striped like this, and say there's a lion at close range that moves in on the herd, when that herd begins to scatter, all that striping effect really kind of just causes mass confusion. And literally what it does, I don't want to say it short circuits their brain, but it makes it hard for a lion or another large cat that's preying on them, makes it hard for them to key in on one animal. And so the best description I heard was, think of a barber pole. When that thing's twisting and you see those stripes moving, it's hard to look at what direction. It seems like the stripes are going up when the thing's going in the other way. And so that's one of the leading theories. But one of the things that was also added, and this came out in a scientific paper in 2015, is these zebras have also evolved in an area where there are lots and lots of flies, or these biting insects. And one of the things they found, they ran tests on this, is the flies, for some reason or another, I don't know if they even understand that yet, but the flies don't like landing on striped surfaces. And so there's two competing, obviously they're both great adaptations because it confuses, when you think about it, there's two predators there that are going after the zebra. You have these lions that will be going after that can get confused when there's too many running in different directions. And then you have another predator which you don't think about, but you have this fly which is feeding on the zebra, and they too are confused by the stripes. So it's one of those adaptations that has really benefited because of this predator-prey relationship. So I thought that was super, super duper cool. And this is what you get when something interests you. If you research it, you're going to learn a lot of this new science. And I had never even heard of the fly situation, but I thought that was absolutely, it was just tremendously interesting. So I sat back. I'm like, all right, I got to get out of Africa. Let's think about all these other animals. And literally every animal I was thinking in North America, a lot of their behaviors, a lot of their adaptations have been molded over time because of this predator-prey relationship. And so what is, for example, let's throw this out. And this will be the only one that I'll throw out. I'll let you guys throw out some others. But there's actually two adaptations here that a skunk has evolved with. I put this up there just because it was a pretty cute picture. But what's an adaptation that skunks have evolved to keep them safe against predators? Obviously, we all know that they're going to spray. So I won't be too. I'll get a little bit more technical than just the skunk spray. But if you notice their coloration, that black and white, if you're a skunk, you don't want to be there and wait till you're preyed upon before you release that spray. And so over time, just that coloration, that black and white, what we find is a lot of the prey species that have some kind of defense mechanism, whether or not it's quills or the skunk spray or poison or anything like that, usually they have bright, showy colors because they want to warn the predator well in advance. Hey, you come close, I'm either going to hurt you, you're going to stink, or I'm going to poison you or kill you. And so it's really cool that there's multiple adaptations that evolve from this. So besides the skunk being able to spray and spread the scent and really scare those animals off, they also have evolved this adaptation to be really showy, so they don't even get messed with in the first place. So with that, if you want, just think of another North American animal. I'll throw it off at the top of my head. If you know anything about mule deer and white-tailed deer are very similar, but one of the things that have evolved over time that makes them different is the way they run. Does anyone know the difference? Trish, you might know this. Does anyone know the difference with how a whitetail runs away from a predator versus a mule deer? Spit it out. Show your stuff. Well, I don't. There you go. Fantastic. So, in case you don't know, a white-tailed deer, if any kind of predator comes around, whether or not it's bear, coyote, humans, anything like that, a white-tailed deer is going to run. And when they run, they kind of run flat. They just run as fast as they can to get out of there. Mule deer do this thing called stotting, and it's Stottting. And that stotting is just the term that that is used for that bouncing. It's literally like a prancing that they do. And you have to think about what's going on. And if you look where mule deer evolved, oftentimes you're in a lot of sagebrush. And some of the predators they're eluding, they got cougars, but they also have coyotes and some of these other critters. But because of that dynamic and the fact that those mule deer are in the sagebrush, which could be a dense growing low bush, they bounce up and down to give them better view of where things are and to maneuver more easily through that sagebrush. Instead of running straight through and kind of bobbing and weaving to get around the sagebrush, they can bounce over it. And so it's just amazing. Every animal I sat down to start thinking about, it was like, man, a lot of this is derived from this predator-prey relationship. So, all right, let me move on and talk about a few other things here. Whoops, I went too fast. So what I want to go through is kind of what we just did with that mule deer exercise, and just think, this whole discussion of predator-prey relationship, there's countless relationships. Usually, when I first sat down thinking about this, whenever you talk about predator-prey, usually right off the top of your head, you're thinking lion and antelope, some of these big critters, whether or not it's some kind of cat or bear going after some kind of deer. And it's way, 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 way more than that. And so there's literally countless predator-prey relationships out there. And I will tell you, I'm going to thank Bob Howdeshell. All these pictures you see are from Bob Howdeshell, who's one of the most amazing wildlife photographers. But you have these dynamics with, for example, grizzlies or brown bears up in Alaska. They are oftentimes feeding on those salmon runs. Tremendous predator-prey relationship. In fact, they've traced some of those things where one species literally controls the population of another species. And one of the things that I found so interesting is when some of the salmon runs would dry up, whether or not it was due to damming of the rivers or some other factor, it really, really changes the behavior of the bear there because they've evolved feeding on these salmon runs. And so they become really dependent on each other, and one species getting impacted absolutely has another impact, a major impact on the other species. So I'm actually gonna quiz you guys. Does anyone know what kind of bird that is? Okay, I'm sorry, Lori. Uh, Lori, I just saw your picture about what does sagebrush look like. I was wondering if I had a piece of it in here. Um, it's the most wonderful smelling bush you ever smelled, but it's usually about knee high to waist high, and so you can get a little bit bigger than that. But for the most part, it's maybe about waist high, but it's this greenish bush that kind of grows in clumps. And right now it's blooming all around me, and it smells heavenly out there. But the deer feed on it extensively, and so whether or not it's antelope, mule deer will feed on it as well. But they've adapted in those environments, and that's one of their main food sources. But because they're in that environment, they needed to adapt to getting around in it when if there's a predator they need to elude, they need strategies in order to move within it. I wish I had a better picture. I'm trying to think. I might be able to show you a picture towards the end. If I remember to show you, I think it'll be a good demonstration of kind of what a sagebrush prairie looks like. And then Laura, you asked, is that also true for parasitism? And forgive me, but is what also true for parasitism? And yes, Bet, Trish, and Rebecca, you nailed it. It's a hooded merganser. Yep, it is a male. I'm waiting for Laura to clarify her question about parasitism. Um, I may be going in the right direction. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the thing is, species evolve with other species, and they create desirable traits that help the individual species evolve. So say you're a prey species, and whatever predator, doesn't matter whatever kind of animal it is, if they're a predator that chases you and runs you down, obviously as a prey species, if you evolve to be faster or more nimble or can climb trees or do something that can evolve that can allow you to elude that predator, that is going to allow you to reproduce and carry on and pass on your genes. And so that it works in both directions. And so if you're a prey species, if you evolve traits that help you elude that predator, you're going to do well. Those are the genes that are going to get passed on. If you are a predator species, if you evolve genes that help you catch the prey species, then that's going to allow you to feed, to survive, to reproduce, to pass your genes on. So it's mutualistic in that case, in that one species benefits another species. Okay, predator-prey relationships include specific relationships that need a host, like somewhat. Yeah, well, yes and no. I see what you're saying, where you need one species is dependent on another species. Absolutely, in some cases, and this is, I hope I do a good job describing this. In some cases, there are some predator species that feed solely on one other specific species. However, there's also lots of predator species that feed on lots of other critters. I'll use an example. Coyotes, for example, they will feed on a whole suite of species. And so a coyote comes along, if something happens and all the rabbits disappeared, coyotes can still survive on all those other, the mice, the voles, whatever small critters they can catch. Now, if there is a predator species that feeds exclusively on one type of animal, and I'm not thinking one off the top of my head, but if that species disappears, then absolutely that predator species will be impacted tremendously, because that's their sole food source. I hope I did a good job. Maybe I can come back and address it another way. But I'm going to move on. I'm going to go through some more of these pictures. So again, this demonstrates the fact that we're not always talking about these big animals, cougars and deer, or bear and this, or lions and that. Predator-prey relations run the gamut throughout the whole ecosystem. So you have coyotes that will be feeding on all sorts of little critters, from mice to voles to rabbits to squirrels to you name it. They're going to feed on some of those little critters. I don't know what kind of bird that is. And I love these pictures. Every one of these pictures, again, came from Bob Howdeshell. And I didn't realize he had so many wildlife photographs of one animal eating another animal. But it just goes to show how often this takes place. That is, it's an immature white ibis down, I believe he captured that down in Florida. But you can see it's eating some small crustacean there. And so I'm going to pick on birds and fish for the rest of my time out here. This particular example here, this is a sea otter. And I'm going to mention it briefly. In fact, I'm going to mention it on another slide. There is a whole new topic that we're going to be talking about, I think, in a couple of months, called keystone species. And the sea otters play an integral role in maintaining the ecosystem. And just so you know, Laura, this is one situation where otters feed, not exclusively, but they feed quite a bit on sea urchins. And if you remove the otter from the ecosystem, the sea urchins will take over, and then the sea urchins will eat all the kelp. It's just amazing the cascade effect that occurs. And this is why it's so important for us as kind of the guardians of these ecosystems to make sure we keep all the parts. We got to make sure that all the species, regardless how big or small, they're critical for maintaining the whole ecosystem. All right, moving beyond the furry stuff, you have birds that will help control some of the insect populations. And so, whether or not it's worms, grasshoppers, bugs, you name it, those birds do a tremendous job at maintaining some of those insect populations. Kelly, I did not know that about the abalone hunt. I know a lot of the Alaska stuff. In fact, I'm looking forward to that class because there's an amazing video I want to show folks for that Keystone Species class. Another one, everyone loves snakes. Snakes are actually really good to have around. There's a lot of benefit to having snakes around. But you have birds like these raptors that will oftentimes feed on snakes. And so the main reason I'm showing you this is, like I said, when most people think of predator-prey relations, they're thinking those big animals that feed on the other animals, the kind of what you see when you turn on the Discovery Channel. But it goes so far beyond that. This was a wonderful picture that Bob took again down in Florida. He captured an alligator that had just captured a coot. And so this is one of those instances where it's a larger predator feeding on something, and oftentimes what people have in mind are these larger apex predators, but again, that's not always the case. Anyone know what kind of bird that is? It's got it looks like a mole or some type of vole in its mouth. Very good. That is a cattle egret. Here's another one. This bird. This is a tern that is eating a frog. And so when you begin it's just one of those things where you sit back and you start thinking about all these dynamics and every bird I'm showing you is a different species of bird, and they're feeding on different things. This is I don't know what specific kind of gull it is. Bob is much better birder than I am, but obviously you see it feeding on some type of shrimp or prawn. And so it's amazing to think about the dynamics and everything that's going on. We cannot even begin to comprehend how complex these systems are. And so when we go in there, and as humans, we had a terrible, terrible track record of eliminating some species. And in fact, the thing is, and I'm not going to put down humans because I'm one of them, we have gotten a whole lot better. Throughout the 1800s, our motto as humans was exploitation. Animals were there for us to use and at our will. Fortunately, around the 1900s, and I'll mention him later on, we've had a change in our thought where we need to preserve these wildlife species. And the best way to do that, obviously, is preserving the whole system. And so every little cog in the wheel is really, really important for maintaining that smooth flowing system. Anyone know what kind of bird that is? Yes, Bet. Rebecca, you must be a birder because you've nailed every bird so far. Yeah, it's a kingfisher. Those are awesome birds. You see them quite a bit, especially in the east. There you go. So, yeah, I don't want to pick on birds and fish, but these were some of the greatest examples that Bob had. Obviously, this is, I believe, Rebecca, I'm going to lean on you. I'm pretty sure that's a brown thrasher. But obviously, you see it feeding here on the insects. And so it just goes to show that we are so incredibly complex when it comes to our ecosystems. All right, I'm really going to test you now. Does anyone know what this is? Because I had to double check. I knew the main species, but I didn't know the exact species. Anyone know what that is? Ah, good. we stumped you for one. That is a swallowtail kite. And he took these photos just a few weeks ago. He was watching these kites swoop down. They would grab literally a handful of vegetation, and at first it puzzled him because he thought that the birds were feeding on the vegetation, but In each clump, they would pick away, and there's usually a grasshopper in there. And so as the bird was flying away, it'd be dropping these pieces of vegetation just to weed out that grasshopper and then feed on that grasshopper. So it's pretty amazing, all the different animals. And so obviously, I'm going to start wrapping it up here. Our national symbol there, the bald eagle, obviously is a huge predator. And it preys, it's a piscivorous bird, so it's usually feeding just on fish. Wonderful capture of an eagle there. But what I want to do, I want to end on a slide because I truly believe this is really important to hammer home with a lot of folks. And that there is another predator out there that helps to shape things. And the one thing, we all talk about humans. And we have done some bad things. We continue to do some bad things, but there's a lot of good humans out there. And they too, on the landscape, can be a predator. Just so you know, I don't want anyone to faint, but that is a picture of me. I do hunt every once in a while. I hunt to provide food. But humans are one of the most efficient predators, but the fact that we have a brain and a mind, we have finally learned how to take animals in moderation. Because like I said, 1700s, 1800s, it was all about exploitation. We took as many animals as we wanted unregulated. What do you think happened? We almost lost bison. Fortunately, there's a couple left, and we're rebuilding those bison populations. But there's a number of species we lost completely because of our actions as a predator. We wiped out passenger pigeons. And so there's many cases where we wreaked havoc, but fortunately we have learned from our mistakes and we're doing a much better job. And so we are definitely a predator on the landscape. And the one thing I don't want people to think is we can't, as much as we would like to, we can't eliminate humans from the equation. We evolved on this earth just like every other animal has. And so humans are part of that equation of what's going on with wildlife populations. So just keep that in the back of your mind, because remember how I said how important it is that we keep and maintain every cog in that wheel? Humans are one of those cogs. And if you eliminate us, sometimes we are a huge part for controlling one population, which helps control another population. So just making sure we're part of that system is really important, but we have to do it wisely. I think y'all understand that. So let's have a really quick discussion here. Most of you know there's one person that is responsible for a lot of what we do today. And in fact, if you follow me, you know this gentleman really well. If you don't know who that is Aldo Leopold. He is oftentimes considered the father of wildlife conservation. He's one of the reasons why we changed our way of thinking about how we treat all these species. And so one of the favorite quotes I have, if you read this at first, you'll be appalled. And this was taken from Sand County Almanac. But he says, when I was young then and full of trigger itch, I thought because fewer wolves meant more deer, that no wolves would mean a hunter's paradise. And so obviously wolves are predators. If you remove the wolf from the system, then the prey, which would be the deer, would just be bountiful. There'd be deer everywhere. And if you were a hunter like a wolf, it would be a paradise for you. And so he wrote this. This was literally what we call a watershed moment for him. Because what had happened is when he was growing up in the early 1900s, this is what humans believed, that wolves were bad. You kill wolves anytime you see them because predators are bad. Besides eating the animals that we like, sometimes they eat humans, which is a rarity. But it was literally ingrained in our culture. It doesn't matter if it was the North American, South American, European, Asian. When man evolved, we evolved being at rivals with other predators. And so we believed we had to wipe them out. And so his line of thinking back in 1900, he wasn't doing anything wrong. That's just what the culture was. And this is what I love. In fact, I get chills thinking about it because this is where things literally changed. he had killed a wolf. And so what happened is, he wrote, when we reached the old wolf in time to watch a fierce green fire die in her eyes. I realized then and have known ever since that there was something new to me in those eyes, something known only to her and to the mountain. And how he ends it is wonderful. He says, but after seeing the green fire die in that wolf's eyes, I sensed that neither the wolf nor the mountain agreed with such a view. And I told you I'd get chills, and I did. But literally from that moment on, when he saw that wolf die, that was a watershed moment that said something is wrong with the way we act. And obviously he went on to become literally the father of wildlife conservation, to start the government doing better things to protect our species. Didn't matter what species it was, from the wolves to the deer to the insects. We needed to keep every single part within that ecosystem. And it was literally because of this predator-prey dynamic. And it created this watershed moment for him that we changed our way of thinking. We developed this North American model, and we do a fantastic job. It's not 100% great. There's still some things we need to correct, but we do much, much better nowadays after having this realization that all species are important. Doesn't matter if you're a prey species or a predator species, we need every cog in that wheel. And so with this, Laura or Lori, I forgot which one asked about the sagebrush. But here's an example. You can see in this picture here, this is actually a picture of Lamar Valley in Yellowstone. But I can't believe I had this in here. In the foreground, this light green growing stuff is sage. I don't know which particular species of sage, but it's usually only about knee high. It might get up to waist high in some areas, but that is what a sagebrush prairie oftentimes looks like. And so it's low growing. When it does get up there high, and it can get very, very thick, by the deer bounding away, they have a much better vantage point to see where those animals are, and to literally jump through instead of kind of zigzagging back and forth to get through that. So with that, this is what I was going to mention. And I briefly mentioned the whole otter situation, them being a keystone species. I'm going to save it. We do have a talk coming up, I think in about 6 weeks, which will be all about keystone species. Hopefully, I feel bad. I feel like I stumbled through this one because I hope you learned a few things with this predator-prey dynamic here. But we do have a talk coming up, and it's going to be talking about keystone species, which, in case you have seen or have watched the Trophic Cascades webinar we did a couple years ago, I think it was a couple years ago. Stephanie Dennis helped us with that one. But we're going to be doing one here on keystone species, and it's so very interesting. And what I hope to do with this one is show a video that was just phenomenal, that really helps explain keystone species. But just so I don't have any technical issues like I did with some of the other folks, if they're on slower connection, they can't watch the video, we'll send that video out beforehand so you can watch it. And then we'll be talking about that video, but that's coming up in a couple of weeks. So what I want to do is summarize what we're talking about here with this predator-prey relationship, because it's so very important. It literally helps species evolve. But remember, they're old as time. Those fossil records that we're looking at 400 million years ago, way before the dinosaurs even started, we started seeing evidence of one animal eating another animal. So the fact that this dynamic, this relationship has been evolving for hundreds of millions of years, you know how important it is to shaping to what we have, shaping everything that we have today. And so because of that dynamic, they truly do strengthen populations. If you're a prey animal, you develop adaptations that help you elude the animal that's trying to eat you. If you are a predator animal, you develop adaptations that help you catch and eat the other animals. And so because of that dynamic, individual species are constantly strengthening themselves. And Just like Aldo Leopold found out, don't hate the predator. There's so many people nowadays, and I believe Rebecca mentioned it. There's still a lot of people in the world today, especially in North America, that still think predators are bad. We got to get rid of predators. And I will do my best. I promise you, I'll do my best to change that way of thinking because you need predators just as much as you need prey items. And so it's that dynamic that keeps everything strong. And it's one thing that I'll fight for. And don't think it's a losing battle because all it takes is education. Uh, there's a lot of folks out there that once you explain these processes to them, then it will click. There are some that it'll never click, but hopefully through education we can start defeating some of these old ways of thinking. And we've been fighting it for over 100 years now, but we'll keep up the fight. So with that, I'm going to end this presentation. I'll be happy to talk to you and share more stories about different animals. I got to thank Bob Howdeshell. I think he gave me almost every picture in there. There's a couple others that I had on the side, but Bob Howdeshell is a fantastic photographer. I get most of everything from him. You all know how to sign up for any of those other classes. I do have a couple coming up that I think will interest you. Best thing to do, follow us on Facebook or Twitter. If I come up with a new class, I will let you know. In fact, I'm going to show you a new class I've been thinking about. But I really, really need and appreciate comments that you leave on the Facebook page because new folks coming in, they want to see and hear from other folks. So it's whatever star rating you want to give, but I'm always looking for comments. I'll tell you the truth. I don't think this was one of my more fluent ones because it is a tough topic to talk about. But by all means, leave comments on our Facebook page. And with that, I will tell you to mark your calendars because the next webinar I have coming up, I think it's 2 weeks from today. Yes, it is. I'm looking forward to this one. This one is really, really cool. It's called Camouflage, Cryptic Critters. And it truly, truly has a strong tie to what we talked about today, simply because there are adaptations that animals have used to either help them elude predators or help them get close to prey items. And so you'll begin to see, after you talk about wildlife more and more, how intricately woven a lot of these topics are. And it's just wonderful because these light bulbs start going off, and the more time you spend outdoors, you're like, oh, now I understand why that's happening, and you're starting to see these relationships, and it makes your outdoor experiences so much better. After that, this is the one that I'm gonna do this because more and more folks, especially in the West Pacific Northwest, they're dealing with more and more cougar issues. I thoroughly enjoyed the bear encounter webinar we had a few weeks ago. And there's a lot more people that have experience with bears, but there is a growing need for cougar education because there's more and more folks having encounters with cougars because their populations are expanding. And again, that's thanks to the wiser ways that we're doing things. And so we're not wiping out the animals like we used to 100 years ago. So I don't have a date for that yet, but stay tuned. And so with that, I'm going to say this is the end of this presentation. Again, I'll talk and stay as long as you all want. If you have any questions about it, just feel free to ask. Okay, let me go back to see some of the comments. I tried not to get too distracted with the comments. Trish says, I saw an amazing video via Panthera.org. Is about a pride alliance had cornered a leopard and could have easily killed it. The leopard began displaying submissive behavior, example, rolling on its back, vocalizing softly. The scientists were amazed to see this and can only guess that the leopard was appealing to the lion's sense of compassion. Don't think I've seen that tactic before. And I'll tell you, I don't know if I have seen that before, but what I'm really interested in, Trish, is what was the reaction of the lions? Did they spare the leopard? That is pretty amazing, and that is a great example. That leopard survived that encounter. So think if there's two leopards. You have one leopard, and they're both presented with the exact same situation. You have one leopard that gets surrounded by a pride of lions. It lays over, does this submissive behavior. It comes out unscathed. Say you had another leopard, exact same situation, surrounded by a pride of lions. It tries fighting its way out. That animal most likely will not survive that pride of lions. One animal's dead, one animal survives to pass on its genes. That's how evolution works. It's really simple to think about, but it's so complex, and it's so slow. It takes, depending on the individual species, just thousands and thousands of years to really work out these traits. And so it's just amazing. Those little instances all contribute to how that species evolves. Okay, Lori says, while you're preparing your Keystone Species webinar, keep in mind her kids next summer. I'm thinking it'd be a good topic. Keystone Species, it's one of those things where it's a really, really interesting topic. And Lori, how about this? You make sure you attend that Keystone Species webinar, because I need to know whether or not the concepts I'll be talking about in that webinar, whether or not that would be easily understood by the kids that you want me to teach it to. Because some of these things can get complex, but hopefully we can do it in such a way that everyone can understand, even the younger kids out there. Okay, Rebecca asks, when prey becomes less plentiful in the winter, will cougars or cats be more aggressive towards non-prey items, like her and her husband and her dog on their dawn hikes? How do I put this politely? Yes. When it comes to predators, they can become extremely stressed when their prey populations are not there. And so obviously that predator then is struggling to survive. It's not finding its typical food source. So what do they have to do? They have to resort to other prey items. And so instead of talking about cougars and humans, let's talk about bears. Bears, when it's drought situation, bears will oftentimes feed on berries, acorns, mostly vegetation. Obviously, we're talking about black bears here. And so they feed on a lot of they feed on a lot of vegetation. I'm so tongue-tied today, it's driving me nuts. Anyway, when bears can't find the berries, they can't find the acorns, and oftentimes this is a result of drought conditions, bears have to shift their diet. So if they're not finding the acorns and berries like they typically do, those other food sources they resort to will stress them out. They will go in search of human-related foods, whether or not it's food, trash or picnic areas. And so when a predator becomes stressed, it literally has to change its diet in order to survive. And so the situation that you mentioned there, Rebecca, if there's an animal, in fact, what they believe happened, the situation you were talking about earlier about the jogger in Oregon State, at Oregon State University, it was a young female. She hasn't reproduced. She is only about 2 years old, but what they found was she is only about 70-some pounds. So she was stressed. She was probably struggling to find food, and so she opted and chose to approach, or at least try to approach, a human, which is a bad situation all around. Not good for the cat, obviously, not good for the human. And so it's definitely a situation where prey items become less abundant, then the predators have to switch their diet to adapt. Yeah, that goes for all animals. Although I will say coyotes, you generally don't have to worry about coyotes approaching humans. There's such a size difference there that rarely are they bold enough to do that. However, coyotes will shift their diet, and where do you think they find a lot of food sources? They'll find those alternate food sources. Say the rabbits aren't out there as plentiful. They move into suburban areas where they're able to find cats, small dogs, those smaller food sources. And so stress is really a driver on what those predators will be focusing their, what prey items they're going to be focusing on. And so when their natural foods are not abundant, oftentimes it drives predators into conflict with humans because they're then preying on cats, dogs, other things like that. So yeah, it's a tough world out there. And in fact, there's a comment I left today is Mother Nature's harsh, and you have to understand that not all animals are going to survive, and the animals that do survive oftentimes do things that are outside the norm, so to speak. I appreciate that, Trish. I apologize to everyone. I feel like I've been so tongue-tied. Have you ever had days where you could just talk so fluidly, and then some days you're just stumbling over words? I'm having one of those latter days. I was stumbling through this one, and I apologize for that. Lori, this sounds like a wonderful exercise. Lori, you do a fantastic thing with those students. I think your students come out learning and knowing more about wildlife than 99% of the students that go through our public school systems. I appreciate that, Daniela. Doesn't change the way I feel because, like I said, some days I feel like it just flows, and then other times I stumble. So we'll take the good with the bad. Well, you guys were great. I've kept you already 70 minutes. So if y'all have any other questions, you're laying in bed, you're thinking about something, you're like, oh, dang it, I wish I would have asked Daryl. Shoot me an email, send me a text, reach out to me through the Facebook. Doesn't matter. We're here for you. I love this so much. I do have other instructors. If there's a question y'all ask me that I cannot answer, I promise you I will go to someone much more knowledgeable than myself to get that question answered for you. And the great thing is throughout my career, I've met so many folks. We've got other Wildlife for You instructors that are phenomenal, but I can reach out to so many folks regardless of whatever type of wildlife question you have. So don't hesitate to reach out. And with that, what I'm going to do, I'm going to stop that recording. I forgot I'm still recording. But I do want to wish everyone a wonderful night, and hopefully we'll see you at an upcoming webinar. But thanks for attending. You guys are great. I wish I was better, but there's always next time. So, all right, guys. We'll see you later. Thanks, Lori. It's one of those topics that you have to present it in the right light so everyone gets something out of it, because you could go in one direction that is not very appealing for a lot of folks. So hopefully I was able to handle that decently. Oops, I'm still recording.